Hi, I'm Tim, guitar player, teacher. Throughout this series so far, we've been focused on scales, lots of them. Scales are the primary source of melody, that is, one note at a time. Now we're going to move on to harmony, more than one note at a time. Previously, when discussing intervals, I briefly introduced this idea in the form of harmonic intervals, two notes played simultaneously. When there are more than two notes, it's called a chord. Chords are defined as three or more notes played together. The most basic of these are called triads. Triads are, as the name suggests, chords that have three notes. Now, these are not the only chords that have only three notes, but they are the most important. There are several parts to the name of any chord. The first is the root. This is basically the tonic of the major scale the notes of the chord will come from. The second part of the chord's label will be its value. This will tell us what type of chord it is. So, for example, in a C minor chord, the C is the root of the chord, and minor is the value of the chord. Past that, there are additions and alterations which we'll get into later. When building triads, and in fact most chords, we're going to be using intervals of thirds. In practical application, there are only two types of thirds, major and minor. While augmented and diminished thirds do technically exist, there are virtually no useful applications for them, so they can be ignored for the sake of building these triads. Keeping in mind the number of half steps for each of these thirds is going to be helpful. So a major third is made up of 4 half steps, and a minor third is made up of 3 half steps. Each triad will contain 2 thirds, one on top of the other. Looking at the notes of a major scale, we can see that the first third gets us from the tonic to the mediant. The second third will begin where the first third ended, at the mediant. So the second third will get us from the mediant to the dominant. So each of these triads will be made up of the tonic, the mediant, and the dominant, or the first, the third, and the fifth of a major scale. Since we have 2 types of thirds to use, we can create 4 different combinations of these intervals: major-major, major-minor, minor-major, and minor-minor. By comparing the intervals of each of these thirds to the notes of a major scale, we can build formulas for them exactly like we did for most of the scales we've discussed. The interval between the tonic and the mediant is a major third. That's actually how we define a major third, but also there are 4 half steps between the tonic and the mediant. There are 3 half steps between the mediant and the dominant, so that is a minor third. So, using the diatonic notes of a major scale, the first interval will be a major third, and the second interval will be a minor third. Because this chord uses only diatonic notes, it is called a major triad. Since it uses the first, the third, and fifth notes without any alterations, its formula is 1, 3, 5. In order to build the major-major combination of thirds, we would have to extend the second interval an additional half step, so it will be 4 half steps instead of 3. In order to do that, we have to raise the perfect fifth of the scale to an augmented fifth. Since we're using an augmented interval, this triad is called an Augmented Triad. Its formula is 1, 3, sharp 5, reflecting the raised fifth. Now looking back at our major triad for a moment, it was built using the major-minor combination of thirds. If we were to lower the first interval by a half step, that would have an effect on both of the intervals of this chord. It essentially takes 1 half step away from the first third and moves it to the second, turning the first interval, the major third, into a minor third, and the second interval, the minor third, into a major third. This is accomplished by simply lowering the mediant, changing the formula to 1, flat 3, 5. Since we are now using the minor third of the scale, this is called a minor triad. In order to create the fourth and final combination of intervals, we need to lower the second interval of the minor triad by 1 half step. This is easily accomplished by lowering the perfect fifth to a diminished fifth. Because this triad uses a diminished fifth, it is called a diminished triad. Its formula is 1, flat 3, flat 5. So we end up with the following formulas for our four triads. The major is 1, 3, 5. The minor is 1, flat 3, 5. Augmented is 1, 3, sharp 5. And the diminished is 1, flat 3, flat 5. By applying these formulas, it is very easy to figure out the notes that make up any triad. Simply take the notes of the major scale starting from the root of the chord and make the necessary alterations for that type of triad. For example, a C major triad would use the notes of the C major scale. The formula for a major triad is 1, 3, 5. So we'll take the first, the third, and the fifth notes of the C major scale, C, E, and G, and stack them. Since no alterations are needed for a major triad, we're done. A C major triad is made up of C, E, and G. A C minor triad also uses the notes of a C major scale. The formula for a minor triad is 1, flat 3, 5. So, just like the major triad, we take the first, the third, and the fifth notes of the C major scale, C, E, and G, and stack them. However, the formula for a minor triad requires that we lower the third, so we need to change the third, E, into an E flat. Therefore, a C minor triad is made up of C, E flat, and G. We can follow the same process for the C augmented triad. The formula for an augmented triad is 1, 3, sharp 5. So the C augmented triad would be made up of C, E, and G sharp. The formula for a diminished triad is 1, flat 3, flat 5. So a C diminished triad would use C, E flat, and G flat. So as long as we use the correct formula, the notes of any triad can be found this way. It is important to point out, though, that much like the intervals we discussed previously, the spelling of each note cannot be changed to its enharmonic equivalent. For example, if we want to find the notes of an E-flat diminished triad, we would start with the E-flat major scale and use the first, the third, and the fifth notes, E-flat, G, and B-flat. The formula for a diminished triad is 1, flat 3, flat 5. After making the alterations, we would end up with E flat, G flat, and B double flat. The B double flat here cannot be respelled as an A. While this would not change the pitch of the note, it would change the spelling of the chord to 1, flat 3, sharp 4, and that is not the formula for a diminished triad. A diminished triad uses the flat 5, and the perfect fifth in E flat is B flat. So this note must be called B double flat to reflect the alteration of the correct note within the major scale. As I said earlier, there are actually other chords that include exactly 3 notes. And while these chords can technically be called triads, typically when we talk about triads, we are specifically talking about these 4 chords. These chords are not very complicated, and figuring out the notes of them is not at all difficult, as long as we use the correct notes of the major scale and the correct chord formulas. There'll be a link in the description to files you can download to help keep up with this and all of the other videos in this series. I hope they help. Triads are the basic chords that serve as the building blocks of virtually all other, more complicated chords. The next complication we add to them is to simply add another interval of a third on top. This creates what are called seventh chords, and that's what our next video will cover. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to keep up with the rest of this series. Like always, I really do appreciate your time. Take care.